Hello, my name is Amber, and I work as a tutor at the Cal State Fullerton Writing Center. So today what I'm going to talk to you guys about is how to reverse outline. So just for a little bit of background, the reason that you might want to actually learn how to do a reverse outline is it's a pretty useful tool to check and make sure that you covered everything that you wanted to cover within your essay, especially if you have a prompt or any type of guideline that you should be following to help you get through an essay. For this example, I am using a pretty short MLA style essay, but even if you're working in APA or if you are doing some type of research assignment, this was just a little bit of literary analysis. You'll find that making sure that you actually go back and check and look for at least these similar types of concepts will help a lot with making sure that you actually talked about everything that you needed to talk about. It can also help you make sure that as you were going through the essay, you didn't stray off topic or anything like that. So, to get right into it, as you can see on each side of my page here, I have my actual essay and then a sort of unformatted outline that I've thrown together. The first thing that you'll notice is I have my thesis on both sides completely pulled out. Here they're color coded so that you can see things a little bit easier. Um, and you can see that I just pulled the whole thesis. Obviously, if you're just doing this for your own uses, it's completely fine to paraphrase if you don't feel like fully copy pasting, or say you're writing it down for yourself instead of actually doing this with two separate Word documents. However you actually feel like doing it, there's really no difference unless you need to do an outline from an essay that you already wrote, say because, a professor wanted to see an outline that you had already done before you wrote your essay. This is also a useful tool for like making sure you have an outline. You can kind of reverse engineer one, right? So here we can see I have my thesis, and so I've pulled it out again. This thesis specifically is pretty long for such a short essay, but this is what we like to refer to as a working thesis, right? It quite literally works for my essay. It's everything that I plan to talk about. It wasn't the most perfect thesis in the world, but hey, it got me a grade. It got me through the class. So for this, we can see that I was specifically talking about imagery and personification as pertains to nature and this jar that existed in this poem. Going through and checking on my actual wordage that I was using in my topic sentences, the next thing that we can look at and see is if at least in the topic sentences of my paragraph I followed through with similar wording and kind of signaled to my reader, like, does it make sense the order that I talked about things in? Is it exactly what I said in my thesis? So the first thing that we want to check for, here it kind of looks like the first thing that I should be talking about is the jar as dominating force, because it looks like I'll be using imagery and personification on both the jar and nature. So first thing I would expect to see is that argument about the jar as a dominating force. If you look at the next yellow, that seems to be my topic sentence for my first paragraph. There's no transition here because generally, if you have a thesis at the very end of your introductory paragraph, it kind of acts as a transition into your first body paragraph. Some people will sort of transition anyway. I don't, because I just don't. I didn't need to. This was a fairly short essay, and I was trying to keep it within the page limit. I just moved straight into an anecdote of the jar. Stevens shows the jar as a force for domination through imagery and personification. I have that good parallel language. I say jar as a force for domination. Again, I also say imagery and personification, sort of remembering to also keep those in the same order. So then the next thing that I would do is I would generally go through the essay and check each topic sentence. Here, just for the sake of time, we're going to look straight into comparing some of my evidence with the analysis here in my my actual outline over on this other side. So what we can see going on here is I have chosen the evidence from the first two lines of the poem. So we have the opening lines of the poem, I placed a jar in Tennessee, and round it was upon a hill. So I just copy pasted that straight over to my evidence. This is sort of similar to how you might choose evidence when doing an outline before writing your essay. So I recommend sort of just copy pasting those quotes as they are, just because it's nice and it's easier to find them that way. The analysis, however, you'll see I actually did sort of paraphrase. So I just say in my outline, I was using a lot of imagery in the analysis of this evidence. I said the jar is man-made, it's a mechanism of human will, an extension of human action. So that would be a lot of imagery used to create personification, right? The next thing that I did in this paragraph, where I'm sort of defending my claim that the jar is a force of domination, is I pulled out the quote, "It took dominion everywhere, the jar was gray and bare." So again, this is literally like it says in the poem, it took dominion, right? There's this idea of domination. And I referred to this as just, textbook personification. The jar now has its own actions, similar to that of man, still man's extension of force. So I explained that Stevens has this idea. The next thing that I did is I took this paragraph and specifically tied it back to my thesis, right? I said the actual sentence in my paragraph is, as the poem literally states, the jar taking dominion of the area by extension, man is taking over the area and subjugating the nature that surrounded the jar. In every paragraph, I don't necessarily have a specific sentence that is super clear about tying back to the thesis, but this one, I think I was pretty clear that that was that sentence. So this is the only one that I pulled out specifically to look at, but that's something that you do want to keep in mind when you're doing a reverse outline like this, or when you're just looking over your essay. This is just a tool that you can use during revision. And during your revision step, a big thing that you might want to look out for is, am I actually tying back to my thesis? When I get to the end of my paragraphs, does what I said make sense, right? Similarly, after I have that tying back to the thesis moment, I sort of wrap it up with what becomes the transition into my next paragraph, right? Now, you don't have to transition this way. I think for the flow of my essay, it made the most sense for me to transition at the end of this paragraph, but you'll notice as I go down farther, I actually don't have a transition at all within paragraph 2 because I open my third paragraph with a transition. That's technically totally fine. As long as you're easing your reader in or out of paragraphs, you can kind of get away with doing it that way. We can see again, as I said before, if I was going to take a look at my topic sentence here, I would want to make sure that it is tying back to my thesis. I do have a little bit of transition in here, so I kind of lied. So I say, since the jar is a dominating force, its counterpart in the poem, nature becomes the object of subjugation by default through these same poetic devices of imagery and personification. Now, this kind of obviously goes back to my thesis, right? I bring back that idea of dominating force again, and then I just introduce nature as the counterpart, and then kind of use the exact same wording, but instead now I'm saying object of subjugation and the same poetic devices of imagery and personification. So we can really see that there is a strong parallel between what I'm talking about throughout my essay, moved on to the next part, and that makes it a little bit easier on my reader to kind of go, oh yes, this is what we were talking about, got it, we're just on to the next thing now. So I'm continuing to strengthen my argument, right? And again, you can see the way that I chose my evidence kind of put exactly what I meant to put in as as those actual quotes and everything. And again, I only paraphrased my actual analysis, because if I were to copy and paste all of this analysis, it would just look like my essay again, right? So paragraph 3, you can see my actual transition. It's very strong. I'm talking about, moving out of these things and moving into the actual topic sentence. And you can see I sort of split up the sentence into 2 parts here. So my topic sentence doesn't actually start at the very beginning, in a sense. My actual topic sentence here is, the physical structure of the poem helps to reinforce the dominating characteristics of the industrious jar as it works to almost consume the wilderness that it now surrounds. So this is where I start to do the bulk of my actual argument in this essay, right? I start to talk about it as a instrument of industry and of human will in a much more complicated way. So you'll see here especially, this is where my use of evidence gets a little bit different than the rest of my essay. Now, this is the kind of paragraph where it becomes really important for this sort of tool to be used, because as you can see, I kind of split up my evidence a little bit weird. I almost bring in my second piece of evidence as something to reinforce a statement that I already said instead of taking that evidence and ripping it apart as you would normally expect in a literary analysis. Once I've made it to this point in my actual analysis, I've kind of gone over most lines and I'm really just driving my final point home about how, you know, these dominating and subjugating forces are working, how the dichotomy of power structures is sort of being used within this poem to defend my interpretation, right? So I'm really just using this final evidence to sort of underscore everything else that I've said, but I didn't end my paragraph on that evidence, right? As you can see, I had a little bit more going on here. We can see here that I'm still tying back to the thesis. I could have used the actual kind of light gray highlight that I had used before on this sentence, right? And then from that, what I'd like to actually go back up to is our introduction, right? So we didn't really talk that much about our introduction. We sort of just jumped straight into the thesis. Some things that people get a little freaked out about is how to do a good introduction, right? We have a great video on here already about that. But one thing I would just want to remind you of, I have a hook here, right? I'm using the definition of an anecdote as my hook. A hook can really be anything. It's not this thing to really get hung up on, right? Professor's going to read your essay anyway, right? And again, I have this little area for backgrounds and definitions. Really, that just is what it is, like whatever you need to be in that area of your introduction for your reader to understand where you're coming from. It's just what goes there, right? So that's why these aren't really highlighted, and I didn't discuss them earlier before in the thesis. And then similarly with the conclusion, but the conclusion actually has some interesting stuff that we should talk about. So your restated thesis, right? It looks a lot like my original thesis. Like if I go back up, we can see here, I have again, imagery and personification is being paralleled completely. I have the dichotomy of domination and submission, which is super similar to how I've been referring to it throughout the essay, but again, we still have this idea of domination showing up in here. We have, lastly, within my restated thesis, the structure of the poem. So we can see that restating a thesis is like pretty much just what it sounds like. You're restating the thesis. You're not repeating the thesis, right? So like things are different. I didn't say exactly the same thing, but it's similar. I have a couple of main points that I've summed up too, because again, this was a very short essay, so sort of restating my thesis did a lot of my summing up, but I had like a little point that I wanted to make before I went straight into what I considered the so what of my poem, right? So the so what is just, okay, so you wrote all of this, restated your thesis. Why do I care, right? It's telling me why this essay matters outside of I just needed to do literary analysis for a grade, right? So here, the reasoning that I gave for that was in 12 lines, Stevens manages to assert a dominant force in the jar while also taking the time to show that nature submitted to that dominance after an attempt to fight back. This subtle power struggle is what makes the poem seem anecdotal in the sense that it tells the story of dominance and submissive dichotomies. It could be about any power struggle, right? So I'm saying at the end of all of my writing, you don't have to take it the same way I did, right? But you have to see the power in play. So that's really how you would use a reverse outline. Based off of my reverse outline, mostly what I actually notice when I go through this, there's a few typos in here. If you did notice that, good on you, because I obviously didn't before I submitted this. This was from about 2 years ago. When I submitted this, there were a couple of typos still in it. It's a good tool to use if you need anything, just to make sure that you are going over your essays on your own. And if this helps reinforce, you know, doing this on your own a little bit, this is kind of similar to how a lot of us actually look over essays when you come visit us in the Writing Center. We sort of start with these higher order concerns and we move our way down to, you know, smaller concerns like grammar and do you have a good hook? Did you introduce your concept well enough? But yeah, all that aside, that's everything I wanted to talk about today. I hope that you found this informative and helpful, and that if you do go on to use reverse outlines on your own, you still can bring all of this to us to have it checked over again just by another set of eyes. So yeah, that's everything. Have a good day. Happy writing!